Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we are talking about the fact that NRG still doesn't have a roster for the upcoming VCT 2024 season. NRG was a team that had a lot of up and downs last year. They had some pretty good ups, some pretty spectacular downs, but overall I do think that they were a very solid team in the Americas. Granted, they definitely had some changes needed going into the offseason, but how the offseason has turned out for them has not been something that I expected, or I think most fans of the team expected. So as soon as the season ended for NRG, they decided to make some changes to their roster for the upcoming season, and they let Artis, Som, and FNS leave. Now, it seems like this was a mutual decision for most of these players, especially Artis wanting to go back to EMEA. He has now rejoined his old FPX roster on Navi. And while Som and FNS have seemed to just go back to streaming, and that seems to be both players' plan for the next year. FNS saying some things like he felt like they weren't communicating properly during the season, that it felt like they weren't even close to winning a tournament during the entire season, which, I mean, by the results, that's not true. They actually came very close to winning at least Tokyo, but we'll get to the results later. But overall, I do think NRG, they were a very good team, but definitely had some flaws to it. They started slow in nearly every tournament, including the regular season stage in the Americas. They lost to some teams that they probably should have won against, but they did reassert their dominance later in the regular season and had a very good showing at Tokyo. But the expectations did not match the results, so whether it was the organization wanting to make a lot of changes or the players just not really feeling it, we now don't have the same roster that they had last season. So as it does for every team, the rumor mill started to churn, and it was rumored that they were in on every big free agent going into the offseason. They were rumored to be in on Aspas, and he, of course, went to Leviathan. They are rumored to be in on Demon 1, Marved, Ethan, Stellar. All of these players that are still names that are out there and are free agents. I mean, it's up in the air for Demon 1 and Ethan, as the EG roster is a big part of this and why some teams haven't finalized their rosters. Right now, the roster is still just Crashies and Victor, and those were arguably their two best players during the entire season. I would say that Victor was definitely their best player. And when they let Artis, Som, and FNS leave, Artis, I definitely understood. I didn't expect him to stay. I did expect him to have a desire to go back to Europe. And with CNET leaving Navi, it just made sense that Artis would return to that roster where it was a championship winning roster. Why not try it again? But with Som and FNS, that was definitely something that I felt that if NRG had the opportunity to keep both players, I think they should have. FNS is not always the player that he once was. He won't get you a lot of kills, but what he will give you is some very solid IGLing. I think he's a top 5 IGL in the entire world, arguably top 3 in Americas. He will definitely give your team structure, and his direction and IGL ability will give you some wins that maybe you don't deserve. He's just really good at using his roster and knowing where to put people. And of course, with the coach Chet being the coach of the Optic roster that won a tournament and almost won a world championship, it was just a mix that made sense. And with Som, I thought Som was one of the more underrated players during the entire VCT America season. This man was putting up almost more kills than the entire rest of the roster, and he was playing smokes. Now, maybe you don't need that from a smokes player, but it definitely helps to have a guy that can just lock down a site and just get kills on the site by just outplaying everyone. And, you know, I think Som is definitely a player that could maybe do well on Duelist or some other kind of role. I do think he is a player that could potentially be versatile, and having a smokes player that gets a lot of kills is not exactly a bad thing. So maybe you want a smokes player that's a bit more, defensively minded and is a bit better at, knowing where to put the smokes and knowing how to really control and keep people off of sites. But at the same time, I think Som was a very nice replacement in terms of thinking of the Optic roster when that roster was together. I think swapping out Som for Marved, it could have been a lot worse. So overall, I thought they did a decent job keeping him, and it did surprise me that they didn't at least try to keep him for longer. So now that they've lost their main operator Duelist player in Artis, their smokes player in Som, their IGL and FNS, you have to replace these players, and I think they've been trying to. Absolutely, they've been trying to, but they haven't landed anybody yet. It's still just a 2-man roster. And Marv seemed like a very likely player to be on their team. He was on Flynn's spreadsheet, and it seemed like it was nearly a done deal, but we haven't heard anything yet. We haven't heard a confirmation. We haven't heard this team really, announce any new players. And looking at these players that are either unsigned or still up in the air with their contract situation, Demon One, Ethan, Marv, and Stellar, I do think that there's definitely some good value there. Ethan, he's already been on NRG, I think more than once. Maybe he was on there for CS. I could be wrong though. I think that's EG. He's been on twice. But he could make a return, and I think he would be a solid addition. He played very well last year. Marv obviously already has chemistry with Crashes and Victor. He's a great smokes player. He had a relatively good season on Sentinels last year. He was their IGL. He really shouldn't have been, but Marv would absolutely be a fantastic choice for smokes. Stellar, rough season for 100 Thieves there. Definitely did not meet expectations, and I don't know if he's a top 10 IGL in the world. But, I mean, at this point, if you're looking at the IGLs that are still available, Stellar may very well be the best option there. And I could absolutely be wrong, and he could prove that he is a top 10, top 5 IGL in at least Americas, but we'll see. They need to replace these roles, and it's better to do it sooner rather than later, because the offseason, it's a long offseason, but it's getting really short. It's not too long before we're playing important VCT games again. And the sooner you get your roster together, the sooner you can start practicing, the sooner you can start scrimming and doing strategies and practicing all this stuff so that you can be prepared for the upcoming season and you can build chemistry early on. That's why the rosters get pretty much locked early in the offseason. I do have questions about the Sentinels roster, but at least the Sentinels roster pretty much decided who was going to be on the team early in the offseason. So now they've been practicing with their roster. And of course, there's roster drama, as I talked about in my last video. But if there's one advantage that I can see Sentinels having, is that they've been practicing all of offseason. They've been playing all these offseason events. They absolutely are going to be warmer than a lot of teams going into the season. And NRG is absolutely falling behind, not having a full roster. And the rumor is, as I said earlier, they're waiting on the EG players. Now, Evil Geniuses, as I stated in a previous video, they are looking to leave esports entirely, so obviously their VCT America spot would have to be taken by another team. And what happened with them is that they won the World Championship at Champions, and then they told their players that they would have to take a pay cut to stay on the team, and of course they didn't want to do that, so all the players want to leave the org, but they're in contract jail, they're still under contract at EG, so teams have to buy them out. And there's not a lot of money in esports right now, and EG has been asking for reportedly too high of a price for any team to pay. So these players are still on EG, and EG's looking to sell their spot entirely. And the latest rumor is that the org FlyQuest may be looking to buy that spot, that may be the front runner for the VCT America spot that team occupies currently. And would the players come with it? If there's all these other teams, like 100 Thieves are reportedly waiting on Boostio, they want him to be the new IGL, that'd be a great addition. NRG's looking at Demon One and Ethan, and there's all these other teams that want the players that are on EG and have thought, oh, we can take advantage of the fact that EG wants to give them a pay cut, we can just snatch these world champion winning players from this roster. But if you have FlyQuest buying the whole spot, why wouldn't FlyQuest also want the roster? This roster just won a world championship. Why would they not want to buy that as well? What's the point of getting the spot if you don't get the roster? Obviously, it's not the only point of getting the spot. They can build their own roster once they get it. But at the same time, why wouldn't you want to buy the spot and the players? And the players are still under contract at EG. Why wouldn't they just buy the whole thing? So if they do that, if that happens, all these orgs have been waiting on EG to make a decision and to sell them their players, and all of a sudden they're selling all of them to FlyQuest. That would be bad. That would be very bad for 100 Thieves, for NRG especially. Like, this would be bad for a lot of the other America's teams that don't have rosters finalized yet. So while I understand the allure of a player like Demon One, who just proved that he was the best player in the world last year, I don't know 100% sure if he's going to continue that, but he's a very good player. He's explosive. He can absolutely just destroy people with the op on Jet. He can play Brimstone, for God's sakes. He's a fantastic player. I understand the draw of him, but at the same time, you got to make a decision at some point. You can't just wait on this other org that is a struggling and failing business to hopefully be able to swoop them up. It might not happen, so you have to plan for the future. You have to look at other options, and I'm sure they have, but they haven't made a decision yet. And that waiting on another org is absolutely going to shoot them in the foot, so I really don't know what NRG is really doing here. At some point, you just have to sign a roster. You just have to sign some of these players. You can get Stellar. That's your new IGL. I'm sure he'll do fine with them. At this point, I don't know if this team is going to build a World Championship quality roster. If they get Demon 1 and then a really good IGL, I could absolutely see a combination of Victor, Crashy's Demon 1 and solid IGL and then another solid Smokes player, let's say Marv. I absolutely could make an argument for that team being able to win a World Championship, but at the same time, you don't have that, and you have to eventually make a decision. And if they wait all this time and then don't get any of those players, that makes them look terrible. And the thing is, they had this roster that I guess the org and the players themselves didn't think could, win a tournament. FNS saying that he didn't think the team was close to winning. But looking at last year's results, they weren't bad. They were a good team. I made a video early in the season saying, hey, they're potentially the best team in North America. And that ended up not being the case, but they did do very well when push came to shove. Looking at the results, starting with Lock-In, 5th to 8th, not great, but they ran into Loud, and that was a single elimination tournament. I think if that tournament was double bracket, they definitely could have gone a much better position. But that placement isn't bad either. Like, that's at best 5th, that's fine. When it's a 30-team tournament, that's fine. They were second in Americas. They lost to EG early in the bracket for the playoffs, and then they ended up beating Cloud9 and then beat EG again. Lost to Loud in the finals. Loud was kind of a thorn in their side for the season, but they were second seed going into Tokyo. That's not bad at all. And then Tokyo, they played really well. They played much better than Loud, was the team that beat them. They got 4th, and I believe they lost to Paper X that tournament. Paper X is a very good team. I don't think there's anything really bad to say about that placement at all. And again, it's 4th, top 5 in a tournament. So you were pretty much top 5 in Lock-In, 5th to 8th, so not technically, but basically top 5. And then you were 4th in Tokyo. That's not bad at all. This was a good roster. They underperformed, yes. They looked shaky at times. They started tournaments kind of late. They didn't right out of the gate kind of fire that you kind of need. But they performed well overall. Unfortunately, their worst placement of the year would come at the most important tournament of the year, and that was their 9th to 12th placement at Champions. And that's definitely a placement that I could see the organization having some pause and concerns about the roster going forward, as well as the roster themselves maybe not really believing in themselves going forward. They lost to Bilibili twice, which was a Chinese team that no one really had too many expectations for. I will give credit to Bilibili. They played very well during those matches. So while they didn't end up going super far in the playoff bracket, they had a decent showing at that tournament, and beating NRG was a part of that. I don't think it's just a case of NRG choked. I do think that Bilibili themselves played very well. NRG did choke, I will say that. They definitely did not look like a very top tier team during Champions, but I still thought that roster was good and showed some promise. And I'm not going to blame any individual player for their performance, but I will say that Artis definitely looked out of place on that roster. I do think he was missing Europe for the entire season, and it just didn't seem to mesh as well with the old Optic roster as Ye did on that roster in the same role. I just don't think Artis filled the void of Ye for that roster, and I don't think that roster really fit him well in comparison to his previous one. But I still thought that, you have FNS, you have Som, you have Crashies and Victor, you have, Victor's one of the best, if not the best flex player in the world. You could make an argument for different players, but I will say that Victor's definitely at least top 3 flex players in Americas, and he's shown very, very good play at an international level, and Crashies is a great player on his own right. So if you have Victor, Crashies, you have a really good IGL and FNS, you have a pretty good Smokes player in Saw, maybe you switch Saw to a different role, bring in a different Smokes player, or maybe you just get a guy that is a really good opping duelist. He can play Jet, he can play operators, like some Ye type. Maybe Ye himself, maybe they could have done that. But no, Ye went to bleed. They stripped down this roster, and I understand that it was a mutual decision between players and the org. But at the same time, it felt like there was more to this roster that could have been had. So it is unfortunate to see them strip it down and then not replace it with anything so far. And obviously they'll get players before the season. The VCT season is 2 months away. That's still plenty of time to get players. But at the same time, you're not going to be as warmed up as other players that have already been practicing, that have already been playing. And I do think having a roster finalized early on in the offseason is absolutely beneficial. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what players they do eventually pick up. But I'm not exactly confident of NRG's chances going into the 2024 season, even if they pick up a player like Demon 1. I just think you haven't built the chemistry yet. It's just going to have to get lucky and click right out of the gate. Demon 1 absolutely would make this roster very dangerous, but, they're going to have to get 2 other guys after that. So we'll see what they do. I do think that NRG is smart enough as an org to see the problem in what they're doing right now and to try to fix it as soon as they can. Obviously waiting on EG and other orgs to make their decisions, but eventually you gotta stop waiting and you gotta make a decision. Anyways, that's all for today. Thank you guys very much for watching. Please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments below about NRG and their roster heading into the 2024 season. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.